Now to weigh in on all of this, former Vice President Dick Cheney, who with his daughter Liz just launched the new group, the Alliance for a Strong America. Mr. Vice President, thank you for joining us. Now, you made a big splash this week with an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal under the headline, "The Collapsing Obama Doctrine." Some very harsh criticism of the president. But what I didn't read in your op-ed is, what is your solution, your plan right now for Iraq? What would you be doing?
Well, first of all, John, I'd recognize that Iraq is not the whole problem. We've got a much bigger problem than just the current crisis in Iraq. The Rand Corporation was out within the last week with a report that showed that there's been a 58% increase in the number of groups like Al-Qaeda, Salafi jihadist, and it stretches from West Africa, all across North Africa, East Africa, through the Middle East, all the way around to Indonesia, a doubling of the number of terrorists out there. The first thing we have to do is recognize we've got a hell of a problem, and it's not just in Iraq. I worry about Pakistan. Just a couple of weeks ago in Pakistan, the Taliban, the same group that we just released 5 of the leaders of from Guantanamo, Taliban raided Karachi airport. Why do I care about that? Well, Pakistan's unique in that it has a significant inventory of nuclear weapons. We have evidence that the man who built the Pakistani program, A.Q. Khan, offered up recently, and that was that the North Koreans had bribed Pakistani officials for sophisticated technology for enriching uranium, and that the North Koreans now have some 2,000 centrifuges operating to enrich uranium. We had North Korea try to provide Syria with a nuclear reactor. The difficulty, the spread of the terrorist organizations is not recognized by the administration. The proliferation of nuclear capability and the possibility that it could fall into the hands of terrorists is not really being addressed at all. And I appreciate the problems we've got in Iraq right now. But what I think we need is a broad strategy that lets us address this whole range of issues, and that involves reversing a number of the policies of the Obama administration.
But let me ask you just specifically on Iraq, because that's the crisis confronting us right at this moment. Would you take airstrikes against ISIS? Would you move special forces into Iraq? What would you do in Iraq?
Well, what we should have done in Iraq was
what would you do now?
Behind a force. Well, what I would do now, John, is, among other things, be realistic about the nature of the threat. When we're arguing over 300 advisors, when the request had been for 20,000 in order to do the job right, I'm not sure we've really addressed the problem. I would definitely be helping the resistance up in Syria, in ISIS' backyard, with training and weapons and so forth, in order to be able to do a more effective job on that end of the party. But I think at this point, there are no good, easy answers in Iraq. And again, I think it's very important to emphasize that the problem we're faced with is a much broader one. That we need an administration to recognize the fact that we've got this huge problem, quit peddling the notion that they got core Al-Qaeda and therefore there's no problem out there. We've got to rebuild trust and relationship with our friends in the region. It's very important to take a broad gauge approach to it.
You wrote in your op-ed, "Rarely has a U.S. president been so wrong about so much at the expense of so many." But a lot of your critics, left and right, say that you are the one that has over and over again been wrong on Iraq, and they point to statements like these.
Regime change in Iraq would bring about a number of benefits to the region.
We will, in fact, be greeted as liberators.
I think they're in the last throes, if you will, of the insurgency.
Now, Rand Paul, pointing to things like that, wrote in the Wall Street Journal also, "Many of those clamoring for military action now are the same people who made every false assumption imaginable about the cost, challenge, and purpose of the Iraq war. They have been wrong for so long. Why should we listen to them again?" Your response?
With all due respect, John, I was a strong supporter then of going into Iraq. I'm a strong supporter now. Everybody knows what my position is. There's nothing to be argued about there. But if we spend our time debating what happened 11 or 12 years ago, we're going to miss the threat that is growing and that we do face. Rand Paul, with all due respect, is basically an isolationist. He doesn't believe we ought to be involved in that part of the world. I think it's absolutely essential. One of the things I worried about 12 years ago and that I worry about today is that there will be another 9/11 attack, and that the next time it'll be with weapons far deadlier than airline tickets and box cutters. And when we have a situation developing in Pakistan, for example, where there are nuclear weapons, where supposedly that technology has been sold to the North Koreans, at the same time the president announces a complete withdrawal from Afghanistan right next door, that we're missing the boat. We don't understand the nature of the threat, and we're unwilling to deal with it.
Do you, in your op-ed, you have a broader critique, which you're making now as well, of the president's foreign policy. And you write, President Obama seems determined to leave office, ensuring that he has taken America down a notch. In this op-ed, you also suggest the president is a fool. That was the word you used. Only a fool would take the approach he's taking in Iraq right now. It almost seems like you're accusing the president of treason here, saying he's intentionally bringing America down a notch.
No, my reference didn't refer just to Iraq. It referred to the fact that we've left a big vacuum in the Middle East by our withdrawal from Iraq with the no stay-behind agreement, by the commitment he made just a couple of weeks ago that we're going to completely withdraw from Afghanistan with no stay-behind agreement. We create a vacuum, and it's being filled, and today it's being filled by Sisi from Syria. It's being filled by their attempt, obviously, to take over all of Iraq. But it's also being filled by places like Pakistan, where the Taliban have just launched a major attack on the Karachi airport. The scope of the problem, in part, is based upon an unwillingness by the president to recognize we have a problem. They're still living back in the day when they claimed we got bin Laden, terrorism problem solved. That wasn't true then. It's even less true today. The threat is bigger than it's ever been. The danger of nuclear proliferation in the hands of terrorists is bigger than it's ever been. We need to dramatically reverse course on our defense budget. We're decimating the defense budget, not al-Qaeda. We need to go back to a two-war strategy, not the one-war strategy that he's put in place. We have 40 brigades in the United States Army. Only 4 of them are combat ready. He is dramatically limiting the capability of future presidents to deal with crises by virtue of the policies he's taken. Now, I don't intend any disrespect for the president, but I fundamentally disagree with him. I think he's dead wrong in terms of the course he's taken this nation, and I think we're in for big trouble in the years ahead because of his refusal to recognize reality and because of his continual emphasis upon getting the U.S. basically to withdraw from that part of the world.
On virtually everything you just mentioned, it seems you also have a debate within your own party. Rand Paul, many see him as the front runner for the Republican nomination in 2016. Given where he stands, again, in opposition to much of what you just talked about, could you support a Republican nominee, Rand Paul, for president?
I haven't picked a nominee yet, but one of the things that's right at the top of my list is whether or not the individual we nominate believes in a strong America, believes in a situation where the United States is able to provide the leadership in the world, basically to maintain the peace and to take on the al-Qaeda types wherever they show up. Now, Rand Paul, and by my standards, as I look at his philosophy, is basically an isolationist. That didn't work in the 1930s. It sure as heck won't work in the aftermath of 9/11, when 19 guys armed with airline tickets and box cutters came all the way from Afghanistan and killed 3,000 of our citizens.
Mr. Vice President, we're just about out of time, but I want to ask you about something you told me back in 2008, just after President-elect Barack Obama said he was going to make Hillary Clinton his Secretary of State.
I think it's a pretty good team. And while I would not have hired Senator Clinton, I think she's tough, she's smart, she works very hard, and she may turn out to be just what President Obama needs.
So, my question, were you right or were you wrong? Did Hillary Clinton turn out to be just what President Obama needed?
Well, I was impressed with Secretary Clinton in terms of her potential going in. The problem was she was working for a president who has a fundamentally different philosophy than most of the presidents, Republican and Democrat alike, have had for the last 70 years since World War II. We believed, we had a national consensus, the world works best when America is strong and is prepared to use that strength when necessary. She has not operated in that kind of an environment. I also think she's been a disappointment with respect to things like Benghazi and other problems that have arisen while she was secretary.
All right, Vice President Dick Cheney, former Vice President, joining us from Jackson Hole, Wyoming. Thank you very much.
You bet, John. Good to talk to you.